Explain like I'm 5 what actually happens when an elderly person dies in their sleep. Not sure, but my grandpa in his later days was mostly bedridden. On his last day, he woke up bright and early, ate breakfast in the kitchen for the first time in weeks. Promptly after breakfast he stated, "I'm gonna go lay down for a while." And that was it. He went to lay down and never got back up. It seemed rather peaceful. Apparently they just stop. A buddy and his wife were maybe 60 years old but not elderly. They were very active. Scuba diving, snowshoeing, etc. He woke up one morning and started his day, leaving her in bed to continue sleeping. After a while he went to check on her and found she was gone. It was determined she had died in the middle of the night. Several hours earlier, he was very emotionally and or psychologically dependent, and her death was a tremendous shock to him. So much so that he passed away that afternoon. Often it's an arrhythmia. Person never knows that their heart stopped pumping correctly. A heart attack can certainly lead to an arrhythmia that kills someone, but often the person feels this and wakes up. A massive stroke can also result in a death that no one is aware of until the next morning. I'm not what I would call elderly, but I had a stroke while sleeping. Fortunately I woke up, but if it had affected a different part of my brain, maybe I wouldn't have. So there's one way. Most often the cause of dying in their sleep is heart attack or stroke. But obviously there are many other potential causes as well. My husband's 87-year-old grandfather died during a nap. He was found fortunately pretty quickly, thank God. It was summertime, in his hammock with his hat still balanced over his face. If he'd have been thrashing or anything, the hat would have fallen off and he'd possibly have fallen out of the hammock. A misconception a lot of people have is that old age kills you. That's not what's literally killing you. What's killing you is as you get older your body breaks down and you become more susceptible to injury and disease. And one day you're not gonna be able to recover from it. So when old people die in their sleep, it just means they were unconscious before whatever got them. It means they were sleeping when they died. It never says anything about the specific cause of death. If you think of all of the illnesses or diseases that could cause a person to die while they're awake, they can also typically cause death while asleep. The term is used to imply the individual died without suffering. It doesn't say how they died, but it says they weren't conscious when it happened, indicating less pain, discomfort than they might have experienced while awake. Usually one of three things: heart attack, stroke, or pulmonary arrest. Either your brain, heart, or lungs just stop working while you're sleeping. Normally this would be rather traumatic while you're awake. Or at the very least know you suddenly unconscious. But since you're already asleep, you pretty much just drift off. From people I have seen die in their sleep, it has been a heart arrhythmia. Ventricular fibrillation is when the heart goes into a type of activity where it does not pump blood. The patient passes out and dies. If the patient is asleep, they just die. Awake, they may be aware. For a few seconds, they are suddenly growing weak and things are getting dim. But they can die right in the middle of a sentence too. It's kind of the same as dying of natural causes. It's basically a nice way to say that someone was very old and had some standard medical conditions, as can be expected for a person of that age. Stuff like heart attacks, stroke, organ failure, cancer, diabetes, infections all qualify. They all act on the body differently. But the common thread is that age reduces your body's ability to fight back, and after a point it is just considered inevitable. In the case of my father, it was heart failure as it happens. My mum was awake next to him and saw it happen. She phoned the ambulance and we all tried for a long time to bring him back. But he was gone. If mum wasn't there, or if she'd been asleep, then we simply would have found him dead in the morning and he would have passed peacefully in his sleep instead. It was incredibly traumatic for everyone involved. Except Dad, as far as he's aware. He passed peacefully in his sleep. I had to have a test where they dropped my blood sugar to 2.2. It went wrong though and my blood sugar dropped to just over 1. I remember just feeling incredible peace and I wondered whether it was designed that way, and I thought dying might feel that was too. Like in your sleep, etc. According to my nurse sister, people generally don't die peacefully. It's a nice thought for family and a comfort for people. But dying is usually really hard and can be excruciating and deeply uncomfortable. It appears that you have enough answers on why. But from a simple standpoint, it's that the cause of death is usually unknown. If a person was old or ill AMD, there's nothing suspicious, then there's no reason to do an autopsy. So they died in their sleep or of natural causes. The same things that kill people when they're awake. Usually, a cardiac event or respiratory arrest. My grandmother passed in her sleep about 2 months ago. Her COD was listed as a cardiac event, which makes sense because she had, I think, 5 stents. When you get old enough for this to be a reassuring rather than concerning explanation for a death, the person in question usually has a medical history that explains pretty well what the exact cause is. They often have a pretty good idea for months or years what's going to give out on them. It's normally some time of heart failure or respiratory depression. Either because those organs are worn out or they've been damaged by things like kidney disease, blood pressure, or blood vessel disease. My great-grandma had a stroke in her sleep at age 97. Apparently, she went to bed and just didn't wake up again. It's a pretty good way to go. That's like asking what happens when any person dies in their sleep or dies in a car or dies anywhere at any time. It has no set meaning. People may assume it means natural causes, but there are a nearly endless amount of specific causes for death. In many cases, the actual specific reason might not be known, because they're not going to do an autopsy on someone unless there's reason to believe something particularly abnormal is at play. Typically major organ failure. When a heart, which is a pump, has been beating 24/7 for decades, it wears out and eventually just stops working. It can be true for other organs. But the heart is a common failure, and a complete heart failure is always fatal. We cannot survive unassisted without a heart to pump our blood. Whatever the cause, the thought of dying while asleep has always spooked me. I've always found that prospect extremely terrifying. More so than the thought of dying while awake. And I'm not sure why. But it just seems extra spooky or creepy to just up and die while being asleep. Dying in one's sleep is just dying while asleep. That can be caused by a bunch of things. Whenever someone dies of old age, what they mean is that they either had some type of organ fail, e.g. heart attack, or that they succumbed to an illness that a younger, healthier person could have survived, e.g. pneumonia. They say died of old age because it's softer sounding.